And what ideally you would have on there is a line that says, when it goes below this, that's your problem, because essentially that line is almost your reserves policy. We don't touch this for a number of reasons, or we've got various levels of how we do reserves policy. So it's something I would really encourage.
Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office Podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy today to welcome you to our Admin and Ops podcast. We love talking about the work of ministry behind the scenes, and I've got a special and a favourite guest, my favourite accountant in the world.
Favourite guest? It's dangerous, Gav. It's dangerous. Favourite guest.
Tim Wyatt, mate. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Oh, I absolutely love coming on. You're a major legend, and it's a treat. It's a treat to break from the spreadsheets and all the other things that go on during the week to have one of the favourite things I love to do, a good chat.
Good chat.
And if it's about finance, then great. So yeah, and
even better.
Particularly church finance is great. So no, thanks so much for having me on. It's a real treat. Big treat.
It's great to have him on, and just as we get into the podcast, you'll know if you haven't been listened to one with Tim before, he's absolutely, he loves the stuff. He's brilliant. He's gospel hearted, loves to serve churches, and I just highly recommend him and his services and what you're doing. And maybe at the end you can kind of fill us in a little bit on that, and love to hear more.
Yeah, a bit of the journey. It's always a journey. Life's always a journey, isn't it? So there's always things going on. But yeah, very happy to fill in. Absolutely.
It's great. Well, before we get into the conversation, because we're gonna be chatting a little bit about kind of cash flow, finances, what's going on for churches at the minute. We're going to be diving into some of those things and looking for some particular advice from Tim as well. And we're going to do that. And so before that, let me do a big shout out to Church Suite, to Gavin and the team at Church Suite. And if you've been listening to the podcast, you know these guys are our sponsors. They're huge-hearted for the gospel and for local churches, and they're brilliant at sponsoring this. So a big thank you to them. If you've not heard of Church Suite, then go and check them out on the website. And this is a tool that loads and loads of churches around the UK and now further afield in Australia, as he travels and takes this kind of spreadsheet out there and this software out there to serve churches. It is fantastic. We were talking it comes up most weeks in our staff meeting. Church Suite. It was like, can someone do this on Church Suite? Yes, I can do this. And expanding the reach and use. And these guys are just brilliant. And
they're great. I mean, we don't use Church Suite. We're not a church at White & Co, but we interact with it in amazing ways. So when we're doing independent examinations, we can get access and pull information from it, do analytic stuff that we love to do. It's fab, absolutely fab. So we're big fans for the bit we get involved in. So it's great.
It's such a time saver. If you haven't got a database, just a standardized database on its own, it's fantastic. And then you start exploring all the other modules and all the stuff that you can do. It is just brilliant. And so not only do they sponsor us, it's a brilliant product. They're a brilliant team that want to serve churches. So get along, check it out if you haven't done that before. That'd be fantastic. Mate, you were saying you were listening to the podcast with Graham Daniels, and you were reflecting on a time that you met him.
Oh, he won't have a clue who I am. And if I didn't have a Yorkshire accent, I would choose to have Graham's accent. I know you are a fellow Welshman, but I could listen to him for ages. Yeah, I particularly remember one time that really sticks out in my mind. We were in my student days many moons ago. We were on a UCCF student leaders conference. I think it was in Wales actually, and the weather was utterly hideous.
You were definitely in Wales then.
I'd lost my gazebo. The gazebo had gone, and we were hunkering down in the main tent, and the wind was ripping through, and morale was pretty low. And Graham shared an amazing missional preach that centered around a story of a professional footballer getting up in his Christmas, the year-end Christmas do, and compelled by his faith and compelled by the Christmas message, bravely sang "Thank you, Jesus, for loving me," and I can't do it justice how Graham repeated it on
Yeah, yeah,
stage, but
yeah,
it was absolutely fantastic and just completely changed the mood. But for me, I
yeah,
never ever forgot that preach. I know we all listen to a lot of preachers, but it's
yeah,
one that always stuck with me around missional opportunity and
yeah.
has sat with me for a long time. So what a legend.
He is a legend, and to have him on the podcast was great. And
Yeah,
if you missed
good.
his episode, then go and check it out. We were talking about the trellis and the vine, and he's just got a really interesting perspective, isn't he? He's like, got two
Yeah,
salaries, one you take, and the other one you find someone in admin and
yeah,
operations. And he was just like so clear.
yeah,
This is what I've learned over
yeah.
these years, and I love that. So,
It's good.
mate, it's fab. And good church management course. I want to do a little bit of a chat on that. You've
Good
been
church management
following it a
course.
little bit in the background, so
I have. I really have. It's fantastic. It's what we do in terms of our services with church and with whether it's our accounts work or independent examination work. We have the huge privilege of getting an amazing insight into quite a large spectrum of churches from across the UK in seeing what their vision is and how
yeah,
different that can be in any local context, seeing what people are believing God is doing and seeing what God is doing and
mm,
implementing. And the vision can be immense, and
yeah,
we leave
yeah,
kind of reviewing that just feeling inspired by what's going on. But we also then see what's going on in the background. We see,
yeah,
all particularly from a finance governance point of view or from a more general governance point of view, and we see that gap that exists
yeah,
between what can be those amazing visions of what is faith inspired to go and do for God's missional work, but then what sits behind that to enable that to happen in delivery. So we've often pondered about that and reflected on that when we've been doing our work. But to see what you guys have been doing and how you framed your course with
yeah,
those kind of key headings of what is the vision,
yeah,
what is then delivery, and how big is that gap, and
yeah,
the bridges you've framed in your course to kind of help churches systematically and have a really good well-rounded overview of how do we bridge those gaps to so that delivery meets vision. And that's when I get really excited. So which is great, because we want compliant churches. We want churches
yeah,
from our point of view that are doing all the great governance stuff. And we are so passionate about those governance things not being about tick boxes.
yeah,
It's not about
yeah,
actually we've done it, we've got it sorted. We are compliant. Here is our certificate at the end of the year. It's actually reframing of actually these are the foundations that springboard us
yeah,
into good delivery to hit that vision.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, big fan of the course, Gav. I'm excited by what you're doing, and I trust
yeah.
churches find it really helpful.
Yeah, it's great, and yeah, check it out on the website.
Yeah.
It's got an introductory price at the minute of 649, and you get a coaching session included in it, which is great. An opportunity to kind of spend some time reflecting. Those early adopters were saying, please use it in your teams. So
Interesting.
you're not
Yeah.
buying a license per person. You this is available for churches to use in voluntary roles, and smaller churches have lots of different roles, don't they, that take care of
Yeah.
management. So, in our church, I do a lot because I'm the ops manager. But most churches don't have, an ops manager. And so it's served
Mm,
by 5 or 6 different people. And you're
yeah.
like, well, get that
Yeah.
5 or 6 people together and
Yeah.
do the
Absolutely.
course all together. And I think that could be like really interesting
Yeah.
to see how that works together.
Absolutely. And
Um,
is that a price per church? So that's the price
yeah.
per church, and the whole team get the benefit. And
Yeah.
as they say in Yorkshire, it's a blooming bargain. It's a bargain. It's
A
great.
blooming
What an
bargain.
investment. So put my finance hat on. What an investment for your team that
Yeah.
actually you can work through that together. So it's great. It's good.
Mate, it's good. Well, let's get on to our topic today.
Yeah.
I know
Let's
you've
do it.
been doing a bit of work, and we've been chatting a lot, and
Yeah.
this whole area of finance, and
Mm,
I think I've been chatting to churches more recently about the importance of having a cash flow,
mm,
and lots of churches are running sort of deficit budgets
yeah.
and are probably having to manage more closely the funds that they've got.
Mm,
And then that also kind of brings into question, then, doesn't it, of kind of how do you use reserve funds,
yeah.
and these are the kind of questions I've just sort of put to you, Tim, and said, can we chat about this? Because I think this is where churches
Yeah.
are at and need some input.
Mm.
And so what what is a cash flow? Give me a
Yeah, it's a great question.
what
I
is
mean,
it?
what a topic to talk on, and on a super day to talk about it. So it's great. So a cash flow. Let's jump into it. So a cash flow is something subtly different to a budget. So I think everyone's got a good idea of what a budget is, because
Yeah.
everyone in there, whether you're working in a church or you've got your own finances, a budget is normally a year overview of what your income and expenditure is going to be, and you are kind of managing and mapping how it's going to plan out during the year. Now, a cash flow is something that's quite different to that, because your budget might be something you're aspiring to, what you're hoping to, what you're managing, or what your kind of faith target might be for the income that year as to what your budget's going to be. Whereas cash flow is a very it's mapping what your cash balance is on a month by month, sometimes a week by week basis. So it's often a very factual forecasting process that's looking at maybe over a 12-month period, maybe on for a longer period for some organizations. And it essentially just takes that opening balance, what's coming into the bank, what's going out, and then what's going to be left in the bank. And it's really straightforward. Now, what some people get confused about a cash flow cash flow statement is they kind of think, oh, haven't we got that in? Isn't that already in our finance system? Isn't it doing that already in terms of what's happened, and it's showing a picture and we can just roll it forward? And it kind of it might well be in your church finances, but there's a lot of things in accounting which are not actually cash. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
things in the accounting world which are based on matching income and expenditure, which may not have come into your bank account to the period it relates to. And the technical term for that is accruals accounting. So anyone who's involved in church finance may have come across that before. But essentially what it's doing is it's stripping anything that's kind of complicated, particularly for bigger organizations that deal with that sort of accounting. They're stripping that out and looking at the simple, what is coming in, what is going out, and what have we got in the bank at any kind of given time.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I think it's so important is if you have listened or watched anything to do with The Apprentice on the
Yeah.
BBC, you'll have heard the phrase "cash is king."
Yeah.
Cash
Yeah.
is king. Now, a business can do amazingly well, epic impact, uh, amazing branding, great customer base, amazing product or service, but if it runs out of cash,
Yeah.
it's all going to fall apart, and you can have an amazing business that just disappears overnight because somehow they've run out of cash.
Yeah.
Now we know that cash is not king. There's only one king, and that's Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus is king. So he's the one who sits on high. But what's important to say is cash is key.
It's
Cash
key.
is key. Cash is
I
key
like where you're going there, mate.
in the
That's good.
life of church. So when we think about a cash flow in its simplest view, it is monitoring the cash that's in the church, and my key emphasis is that is key.
Yeah.
If it's not king. So yeah, that's a real kind of simple overview of why I think really it's important and what it is.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, isn't it? And I think it gives you if you're in a situation where it's quite tight,
Yeah,
and you're talking there about weekly, and somebody could be doing a weekly cash flow on some of
yeah,
this stuff,
yeah,
that
absolutely.
could be a reality. But it gives you that ability to go, actually, well, where are funds going to begin to
Mm,
start to slow up?
yeah,
Where are
yeah,
we going to run out of money that actually, if we don't make some decisions in, January, 2027, we're going to run out of money.
yeah.
And we've done the work of working out, okay, here's what we think and anticipate the income to be,
Mm,
but we still might not be hitting, all of the expenditure that we're currently running at.
yeah,
And some changes are going to have to come. So decisions around, leanness and
yeah,
staffing and those big kind of budget items,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
it helps you to make those decisions, doesn't it?
It's an amazing decision making tool, and it's what I would. There's a few kind of things I'd explore in here, kind of key headings. A cash flow is like your early warning system, is
Yeah,
what I would say.
that's a
It's your
good
early
way of
warning
describing
system.
it.
It's a great, and if you are someone who is doing your cash flow, or your forecasting is another kind of phrase that a lot of people would use, but cash flow is particularly looking at what's in the bank. Um, it's a really important job, and it can at times feel a little bit weighty. So
Mhm.
I often do some quite detailed forecasting things for charities that kind of fairly large, over the £1 million kind of income mark, and even every time I do it every month, I kind of feel the weight of that. Like, oh,
Mm.
this feels quite weighty, and sometimes it's really important to take a step back. Actually, the responsibility is not on me. This is an early warning system.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what we're trying to do is kind of is to raise a flag or put a light on the dashboard. If you kind of imagine,
Yeah.
you're in church life is a bit like a dashboard, and we're seeing
Little
what
amber
lights.
warning.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. What's flashing up? What's not green? What's flashing up? And it's to raise that flag to say, hey, we've got an early warning here.
Yeah.
Something's flashing up to say that in a few months' time, or maybe even next year, things are looking a little bit tight. Now, there was something that I will never forget my head teacher at school telling me.
Oh, this is going to be a
He
story.
Here's the story. Here, you never forget your teachers at school, do you? And
No.
particularly, we had a legendary head teacher, and he would say, if a big ship is on course and it makes a few degrees turn in the wrong direction
Yeah.
in any given year, that may not be an issue. But by the end of 7 years, the direction and where they've ended up could be drastically out from where that ship needs to be.
Yeah.
Now, he was using that in the context to say, guys, if you're going off in the wrong direction and you don't start making small adjustments, by the end of year 11 or sixth form, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
But if we apply that to kind of the
Yeah.
finance world, it's
Yeah.
still the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm very conscious that, and as you've alluded to, that there are lots of churches, and also kind of the Charity Commission has done some amazing stats on this, that proportionally more small charities across the UK spent more money than they got in.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
actually, if that kind of carries on, because some churches have fairly large reserves, some don't. But if that was to carry on, and you imagine that being a ship, and actually, if you don't have a cash flow forecast to say, do you know, the early warning system's not coming up, if you don't make those small adjustments as you go along to say, hey, this is the early warning flag, we've got to tighten our belts, we maybe can't take on that additional youth worker, or we're going to have to look at something else for the building, or that church plant might need pushing back by a bit. If you don't make those small incremental changes as you're going along, that's when you can get into what I call the doomsday scenario,
Yeah.
which we
Yeah.
don't we never like talking about, but it is important because there are times when, particularly in charity and church finance life, when things do go wrong, and
Yeah.
often the kind of financial governance of an organization does play into that. So I would say early warning system is something that's really important in terms of how we think about cash flow, even if your church has had a long history of actually cash not being an issue. And sometimes you
Yeah.
kind of feel like,
Yeah.
do we need to do them? Cash is fine. But sometimes actually just having some system in place to have those early warning systems really helpful.
Yeah.
So
No, that's
thoughts
helpful.
on
Tim, what would be some of your recommendations to someone like in my role putting this
that?
together, um, and then
Yep.
submitting it to the elders? Is this
Yep.
something that you should be, you know,
Yeah. It's a
because we're
it's
doing most churches are doing some kind of like monthly or quarterly reporting, aren't they, with their finances? It's
yeah.
going to leaders, it's going to trustees or
Hmm.
PCCs. Where does that kind of fit in alongside that?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing whenever we talk about kind of forecasting, particularly cash flow to churches that get in touch with us, is the first thing I ask about is, what is your risk profile?
Mhm.
So, what is the risk profile of your organization's cash? So, if we think about a budget, and this is where a budget is brilliant but has its limitations. So, if you were to say a church's budget is £100,000 and we're going to spend £100,000 in the year, you would look at that and think, oh, right, that's okay. The church has got some good reserves in the bank. The budget's looking fine. They're going to break
Yeah.
even. But what it doesn't tell you is what's happening within that 12 months. What
Mm.
it doesn't say is that church is fully reliant on a big gift day, that essentially they receive a strong proportion of their income from one moment in time where people are giving one-off gifts. So
Yeah.
if that is the case, and there are quite a few churches that may be like that, where they're quite reliant on a gifts day, the risk profile changes, where actually you've got a slightly higher risk profile to say, actually, we are reliant on this one piece of time and the generosity of individuals to give
Yeah.
a one-off
Yeah.
gift. So having an understanding of what is your risk profile in terms of your cash flow and your cash position, and maybe even your reserves, and we can go on to talk about reserves a little bit later, because it's something I get a little bit passionate about is all things reserves. But that's the first thing I would say.
Yeah.
The second thing is there's some really practical tips around start simple. It can sometimes, particularly if you're a church that aren't doing cash flow forecasting, or maybe you're a newly formed church, a church plant, and you're setting up these systems, or you're having a change in risk profile, and
Hmm.
actually things are getting a bit more tricky cash wise. Start simple. It doesn't have to be anything hugely complicated, and you can probably use what you've already got. So if you're using some kind of finance system or software, whether it be some of the main packages that a lot of churches use, Expense Plus, other cloud-based packages, Zero,
Yeah.
and various things, you can probably use a lot of the historic data that's in
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
then
That's
just
good.
add on to your spreadsheet. This is what it's going to look like. But also you may well actually just be able to kind of very quickly put a draft cash flow together if you're needing to do it quickly, where you know what your average donations is
Yeah.
each month and your
Yeah.
average expenditure, your cash, your staff costs, and you can then build it up quite quickly. So it doesn't have to be complex,
Yeah.
but developing a system that is efficient and quick can be really helpful so it
Yeah.
doesn't become a burden. So there's some of
Yeah.
the kind of top tips, and then obviously reviewing it regularly, but also the other thing just to have is what lens, the kind of glasses lens that you apply when you're looking at your cash flow, because sometimes it's very easy to kind of fall into we want the cash flow to look good. So we're going to be quite positive
Yeah.
about what it is, and sometimes that's good because there's kind of then differing lenses of how you look at it. But generally, the top tip around cash flow is to be deadpan. What do we think is going to happen if erring on the side of prudence? Because
Yeah.
it's there as that early warning system, and we can
Yeah.
talk about the flip side of the coin about how it can really help mission. But they're kind of some of the really kind of basics I would kind of outline as a top tip for
Yeah.
navigating
Yeah.
cash flow.
And so kind of, yeah. So would you do a quarterly um cash one, or would you
That's a
would you do
great
that?
question.
How often are you doing that?
Have to do it. Yeah, and I would say that completely depends on your risk profile.
Yeah.
So it comes
Okay.
right back to that, comes right back to that
Yeah.
starting point of actually what's your risk profile. So you might have a church that's been going for years and years and years and have a very strong reserve, and actually their risk profile on the cash flow is quite low because actually it
Yeah.
doesn't matter whether when their one-off incomes are coming in, because they've got a reserve that can cover it and they know that the budget is going to probably come on
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Yeah.
there's various things. There is probably no need to do a weekly or a monthly cash flow for that, and a quarterly might be okay to say this is what it's looking like, and our early warning system, we've got
Yeah.
enough confidence and knowledge to do that. So it's trying to base it. But whereas if you've got a high risk profile and actually cash is really tight, you may need a system that helps to look at that weekly,
Yeah. Yeah.
and know exactly when it's coming, exactly what's coming in and going out when. Because that's, as I said at the start, with cash being key,
Yeah.
you can end up in a situation where, okay, overall in the next few months, we're going to have enough money and expenditure to pay everything. But
Yeah.
if that doesn't happen at the right time, we can run out of road, particularly if there's financial commitments in there and very delicate situations of we've not got enough money to pay the staff when we're meant to pay them. It
Yeah.
gets quite tricky quite quickly with some compliance matters and governance matters. So all to do a risk profile, and then based on that, you adjust accordingly as to how regularly it's needed.
Yeah. So dig down a little bit more
Mm.
then, Tim, with the kind of risk profile.
Yeah.
How does a church hear that and go, okay, right, how do I put one
Mm.
of those
Yeah,
together?
it's a
What
really
factors are you
question.
considering in that?
Okay, I think what's probably helpful is to give an example. So
Yeah.
about 2 years ago, we were working with a charity which was birthed by a church. Actually, so it's not an actual church, but was a kind of a missional arm of a church,
Yeah.
and then kind of gave birth. So very kind of very similar finance model to a church. Now they started off having a very what I'd call kind of a low risk model where pretty much all the income's coming in monthly, either
Yeah.
via monthly donors, or the service they were providing that people were paying for was covered. And what was happening there is that kind of set the base of actually our risk profile is quite low, and it's okay. So we're seeing that the income and expenditure are nice and straightforward. What can happen over time is things evolve.
Mm.
And that's when I get worried as things grow, things change, and the profile changes. So there's more one-off donations. The service that's been provided is more complicated.
Yeah.
The size of the organization has increased. So this organization in particular grew very quickly. And we do see at the moment there are some churches that are really growing
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very fast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what can happen with that, and just as an example around assessing risk, is that you end up having the same mindset of when you were small, thinking what we've got in terms of our reserve
Yeah.
or the kind of the process we've got are fine, and then you realize actually we're three times the size, and our finance commitments three times the size, but we're still operating on the
Yeah. Yeah.
same
Yeah.
amount
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
cash
Yeah.
as we
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
So there are lots of scenarios where the risk profile can change, and there's lots of factors to that. So you can talk about size, you can talk about payment frequency, you can talk about your commitment. What is your staff cost level? What would happen if you had to make your staff redundant, and what would be
Yeah.
your overall redundancy cost of a as an organization? So there's lots of things. So
Yeah.
it's quite
It's good
hard to
examples. Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
and really it's about taking a step back and helping assess risk, because it's one of those situations that's not you can't fit it in a box and say you're in this category or
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
are this
Yeah.
risk. It's giving the skill set to those who are in the church to say, based on how this feels, looks, and all these different criteria, this feels like it's the risk. Now, just to go back to the example I was showing about that charity. Now, what happened with them is that they went on such a journey that they hadn't changed their processes.
Mm.
And what happened very sadly is that from the outside, they were doing an immense job. They were doing some
Mm.
great work for the kingdom, having a huge impact, had a amazing local reputation. And what happened was essentially they had just had a 6 month period where they had some uncertain income that hadn't come in. They weren't tracking their cash flow,
Yeah.
and essentially we and a few others had to basically whistleblow and say, "Oh, you have essentially you're about to run out,
Mm.
and it's
Mm.
almost too late," because there's some requirements in UK governance that if you as an organization are about to kind of you essentially you can't carry on financially,
Yeah.
you need to do that as soon as you know,
Yeah.
basically, before
Yeah.
it gets
Yeah.
tricky and you have to go into liquidation and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of that's an example where, even though not a nice one, where an organization can appear like everything's going in its
Mm.
favor, it's going right, and actually just because they didn't have that early warning system, they didn't know that the end of the road is coming and
Yeah.
make those
Yeah.
key little pivotal changes that we were talking about earlier. So,
Yeah. Yeah, mate, that's helpful. And I think those, for me, some other examples of that where the risk increases, isn't it, is around buildings, projects.
yeah,
You know, that's
absolutely.
a big thing, and
Yeah,
introducing some cash flow in
yeah,
those kind of situations are
yeah,
great. And obviously
yeah,
building costs are significantly spiking, and
yeah.
materials are spiking. And
Mm,
so you know, you could be watching, you could be working on a project a
mm,
year ago on a budget, and suddenly the cost of materials is 10-15% difference.
absolutely. Yeah.
And that can significantly affect it. And just being able to pay the bills as you go along, and faithfully do that well, because we want to have a
Mm,
good witness, don't we, with those who we're working
absolutely.
with.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be delayed because we haven't got the cash anymore.
Mm, yeah.
These are important things, aren't they? And
Yeah.
so particularly
Absolutely.
when you're doing that, and I think it's also helpful for leaders to have a cash flow when they're thinking about adding staff members
Absolutely.
to it. You're growing, and there's
Yeah.
an expectation on the church of, great, we can afford more staff.
Yeah.
And actually some of the risk things are, actually we're willing for our total budget to be 50% of staff or 60% of
Mm,
staff. That if it creeps over that mark, we're gonna, it's a flag to say, actually we need to
yeah.
have a conversation about this.
Yeah.
And I've seen churches that have gone to like 75% of their budget is going to staff.
Yeah.
And we can't tell you exactly where that should be, but that does
Mm,
feel quite high.
yeah.
And lots of churches that I've seen sit at around 60%,
Mm,
and that seems to work. And it's these things make a difference, don't they, when we
they do.
start adding things like that to a budget?
They absolutely do. And this kind of where when we're having some of these conversations with churches, the one thing that often comes up, and the buzzwords come up a few times, is the word reserve.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this comes in because what often we see is when organizations are making decisions of, do we have the money to make this decision of this building project, or a commitment like a staff cost, because what is often different to the building cost compared to the staff cost is
Yeah.
your building cost might be one off, albeit you got your ongoing maintenance, but if you've got a big project, it's one off. Whereas staff member costs, it's the ongoing committed cost
Yeah.
that's going to be.
Yeah.
Now, what often we see in terms of that decision making process that we see coming through is, have we got the money to meet that cost at the moment? But what it doesn't necessarily consider is actually, if we've then grown, so let's say we've taken on another staff member, or we've done something with the building so that actually we're increasing our ongoing cost, what does our reserve need to change by, so that we're actually keeping our foundation, that's kind of the reserve that helps us keep the sturdy foundation, what that needs to be in a changing scenario. Now, and we talk about reserves policies a lot, and I think you might get quite a few questions about it. We get a huge amount of questions
We do get a
about
lot.
what does our reserves need to be, because the Charity Commission say every charity needs to have a reserves policy, essentially, unless you've justifiable. And there's often a big myth that it's the going reserves policy is 3 months of your running cost.
Yeah,
That's
well, that
what you
just
will see
seems to
across the
exist
board.
with everyone I speak to.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is, where has it come from? Because the Charity Commission don't say that. It's not a Charity
No,
Commission thing.
no.
The Charity Commission really advocate a bit about what we were talking about, risk profiling, is those charged with the governance of the church to do their own assessment, to understand what is the reserve level that you in your church need. And reserve level comes hand in hand with cash flow.
Yeah.
Because essentially, if you were to think, and I should have come prepared, I should have had a drawn out graph, Gav. Next time I'll have some props ready. But you know your cash flow, the line graph, it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And what ideally you would have on there is a line that says, when it goes below this, that's your problem, because essentially that line is almost your reserves policy. We don't touch this for a number of reasons, or we've got various levels of how we do reserves policy. So it's something I would really encourage organizations to always have an active look at, particularly ideally yearly, to ask that question: have we got the right reserves? And if we, and why are our reserves the level that they are? Is the big question. Now, if you can't answer that, it's probably because it's been the same for a long time, or it's been historically a compliance thing. We've got this reserve because it's a compliance thing, we want to do it. Whereas if you're able to answer why, and it comes back to what we were talking right at the start around the church management course you've got coming up, is the reserves policy for me is one of those grey areas of compliance and governance that kind of is, some people will feel, is kind of brought on the church because it's Charity Commission, it's required, it's meant to be there. But actually, it's the flip side of the coin we've not necessarily talked about, is how that piece of governance springboards you into your missional opportunity.
Absolutely.
This is where I get really excited, and I start banging the table, particularly when a church rings me up saying we're thinking of church planting, we want to talk about it, and I'll start getting excited about reserves policies. But if we were just to pull it from the Bible for a moment, and we look at Genesis and look at Joseph and his dreams that he had, and the context of Egypt and Pharaoh. And if I was more musically talented, I'd do you a quick musical rendition of Joseph and the scene. But if we want to see a biblical principle of reserves policy, boom, it's there in Genesis. We know that we've got 7 years of famine coming, and we're going to have 7 years of good times. Now, albeit we don't necessarily have the dream gift that Joseph has to know that is coming, but the principle remains that actually Joseph was able to implement, and it wasn't just storing grain; it was a whole economic strategy for a nation to say, our reserve level needs to be this. And so that we can go on and do X, Y, and Z, and it's there
through those 7 years.
Absolutely. And what excites me for when I see churches grapple with their reserves policy and linking it with their vision to say, okay, in 5 years' time, we want to church plant, or in 5 years' time, we want a new building, or we want to do this project, or we want a new youth worker. What will it take for us to do that, but do that really well, so that we have a foundation where that activity can be sustained for a period of time? And when you kind of link that long period vision with an example of a reserves policy and what cash flow you're going to need to do it, that's when I start to get excited, because I start to think this is when everything starts to line up, and and you talk about that vision can be delivered. So I've got some stats. If we think about church planting, for an example, because it's quite an interesting area, because it talks about the life of a church. There's some quite scary stats about church planting. And depending on where you look at terms of the research that's been done, a church plant's survival success is anywhere kind of between 50% and kind of the upper 60s, depending on the research that you look at, which may seem like that upper 60s seems like that's quite a strong figure. But actually, that's still a very high proportion of church plants that are not making it after 4 years. And I can guarantee you that isn't because there isn't the passion, the kind of the sense of God's calling and the commitment and all of that. It's normally because actually that, as we've talked about, that gap between the vision and the foundation, it can be quite large. And in terms of those who are doing church plants, it often comes down to how are we putting the infrastructure in place to help birth that initiative and set it on its way, of which reserves and cash is a big part of that story. So it's something I get quite excited about, Gav.
I love it, mate. And you're right, these tools and these this activity around our finances really does serve our mission, doesn't it? And our vision and what we're seeking, what God is calling us to do. You may have kind of gifting in your church in this area of finance and not in vision, but actually the gifts that you have paired up with those who are visionary leaders. What a dynamic that is to moving vision into action, into
absolutely.
delivery.
Absolutely. And because I love telling stories, I'll give one example of a really great where we see this in action. We worked with a church up in the Northeast who were pioneering a kind of a missional arm. They saw an opportunity within their area where to provide some services that the council was struggling to provide. And it started to go quite well. And they generally didn't quite know, what do we do with this? How do we need to birth it? Do we carry on with what we're doing? And they basically got in some help. They got in some help with people who actually, we don't have the skill set in the church, but we want to kind of plan this. We want to do this well. We see there's a real opportunity here. So they got the help. We were part of that help and journey, and able to kind of birth this missional arm of the church in something separate. Now, that's 5 years on. That charity is a multi-million-pound charity, providing a breadth of services for the community based on all the principles and heart that church put into it. And and that happened because all of those governance background areas came together, and the church was like, we want to do this well, we want to plan for it. And part of that was the cash flow, the cash management, and all the things. But you could see, wow, and now we see this organization that is making a huge difference in its community. And that's the opportunity. You kind of think, wow, when you see it. And the sad flip side is actually when it doesn't go too well and you've not got those things, it can go the other way. So it's a fantastic example of where we see, wow, God's
mate, that's so encouraging, isn't it? That those steps and these things can really do, really does make a difference. And I think the reserve policy thing is really interesting. We do get a lot of questions around it and discussion around it, and sometimes it's like permission to when to use those funds, and you were talking about that line and when funds get to this is where we really need to inject with reserves. But it also kind of brings in a conversation, doesn't it, around kind of faith and visionary leaders who are saying, right, the risk element of wanting to go out there and do a church plant, say, which is what we've been chatting about, and we don't have the funds in our budget. And yet we're thinking, right, do we take half of our reserves, and go and do this church plant? And if you're in a situation like that, and they're sort of looking to the treasurer or the finance person to go, is that going to be okay? Give us the thumbs up. And I feel for the people who are leading those things, who are having to kind of come back to that and go, right, what do I do? And that there just isn't a lot of conversation about reserve funds amongst trustees and churches that I'm aware of. So it's fascinating to, as maybe a takeaway today, you can look at some cash flows, but actually having a conversation about reserve funds is really interesting, because we can tend to just add stuff to it, but never
Absolutely.
use it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the key question that I always ask. And I said it earlier is why are our reserves the level they are?
Mm,
And are they suitable for what we feel God is wanting us to do for the
yeah,
next
yeah,
5 years? And it's often and we have a full spectrum. We've got that spectrum of the churches who are like, right, we we're desperate for reserves. What do we do? And the vision and the gap of reserves is there, and that's always a challenge. But we do have lots of churches that actually their reserves are huge, and
yeah,
actually there's if we were to kind of look at that as a kind of as a review in like an academic process and think actually apply some risk to it and think
yeah,
actually no you there's probably quite a lot of reserves you could invest here or
yeah,
do
yeah, yeah,
something with to the mission. So there's a real balance, and it is a hard one because it's in lots of times finances is black and white. It's very clear. It's a
yeah,
yes or no. It's in, it's out. It adds up or it doesn't add up. Whereas a reserves policy and the reserve you need is not. And getting that balance
yeah,
and for your church and your context is not straightforward, and everyone's got a different opinion on it. So there's no
yeah,
it is not necessarily a science, but maybe more of an art framed with prayer
yeah,
and
yeah,
discussion. And
yeah,
ultimately, that's how you probably get to the best place of
yeah,
testing that
yeah,
reserve policy is actually how are we what is our sense around this and the decision making process. So yeah, I
yeah,
think I hugely advocate that those conversations
yeah.
and particularly with the context of mission and not just avoiding doomsday. So yeah,
Yeah, no, mate, that's so helpful, and I think we have seen and you may agree, we have seen a change in culture where there isn't just one treasurer or one person now responsible for the
yeah,
finance. We're seeing teams and little
yeah,
committees or
yeah,
finance teams coming together, and that workload being shared, but that
mm,
workload being, you know, better discussions and better decisions are made, and more times given to these reports and cash flows that help our leaders to
yeah,
really do what God's called them to do. Um,
absolutely,
all of that is happening, isn't it? And it's so encouraging, isn't it, to see that in
yeah,
churches?
absolutely. And the what is brilliant is the increase in the tech, the software, our friends at Expense Plus and other providers out there. Um, even Church Suite providing some of the the gift aid stuff that they do and other bits and pieces. The information that's available now to individuals within a church is much more, and
Yeah,
I love it when there's a team in place because I know how it can be such a heavy burden on an individual,
yeah,
and it's not always straightforward. So the infrastructure to be able to do team is much better than it used to be. So yeah, if that's something you're thinking about as a church, of actually how do we if we're needing to move away from a single person carrying it, then
yeah.
a team option is definitely a really good thing
Yeah,
to consider.
absolutely right. And I think Expense Plus do this so well, don't they? They're just different layers of
Mm,
authority. So you can have trustees that can log in and see
yeah,
stuff. You've got staff, you've got volunteers.
yeah,
You got people being able to manage their own budgets. All the stuff that these guys are thinking about and
yeah,
putting into practice. It's now you're now able, aren't you, to do it as a team,
yeah. That's
and
it.
the software enables that to go even
Mm,
further, which is brilliant. And
yeah,
so grateful for Sam and the team at Expense Plus, and we love
absolutely.
those guys and their hearts again
Yeah,
for the local church. And if you've not come across their software, then please, let's do a shout out from. You used to have a little cup, didn't you? A mug in the background, a kind of
yeah. I
expense
think it's
plug.
I did used to have a mug in the background. I think it's probably because I had too many of my pasta mug shots out of it, and it's in the dishwasher.
Yeah,
Probably,
yeah.
yeah. It's probably what it is. But
So
yeah,
to finish up, then, kind of broad
mm,
question:
yeah.
anything that you're aware of that you think just would be really helpful for churches just to consider? You get to see a lot of churches, a lot of
Mm,
stuff they're doing in the background. Cash flow is going to be really helpful.
yeah,
The reserves conversation, takeaway is really good.
yeah.
Is there anything else while you're on, mate? You're
Yeah,
thinking, do you know
there's a
what?
few things. We've been on some conferences recently. We actually went on a charity commission conference. So between the last time I was on and we went on a charity commission conference that was delivered by them for faith-based charities, which was really interesting. And it's interesting to hear some of their their
Yeah,
their insights from them themselves. And what was interesting about it, some of the things they were bringing up. So I'll just kind of highlight some of the things that they mentioned. One of the things they were talking about is um, probably one of the most boring of boring areas that we would never want to talk about, the Constitution
Oh,
and
lovely.
the governing document.
Yeah. Yeah.
But really important, they were highlighting some things which are particularly prevalent in faith-based organizations, which they are seeing a trend of of churches and other faith organizations outside the church not realize they're falling foul of. So in churches, there are often not necessarily Church of England churches because of how they're constituted, but those churches that have their own governing document that they've set
Yeah.
up themselves, is because churches often have a lot of family members involved in the governance of the
Yeah.
church, and then obviously also employees who may be related to them. There
Yeah.
are rules around in constitutions that basically have to have expressed permission for those who are employed that have a direct family relative who's a trustee or a direct responsible person for governance. There are some very specific rules about that and permissions that are meant to be held with the Charity Commission if it's not in your governing document.
Mm.
So they were basically saying, if you haven't looked at your governing document in some time, dust it off, check it,
Yeah.
make sure it's okay. So that's one thing that they were mentioning, which we have kind of looked at a little bit more and realized actually, there is some things in this that people haven't realized, and it's not the exciting thing, but it's important. So
it very much is. I was doing a seminar last week at the FIC conference on governance with Becky Thomas, and I was
that in Blackpool?
Blackpool, yeah,
very good. Yeah. I heard this was really good. I didn't realize that you were doing a talk on it.
Oh, right. Well, if you've heard it's good, then that's great. That's really encouraging. But I was liking governance, and you'll like this because you like good analogy and good illustration. So good governance is like a motorway.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so central reservation is your governing document.
Yes.
Absolutely solid.
Yeah.
You know, it's the thing that's going to keep you safe from going into ongoing traffic, just danger, and you want that to hold firm, And then your roles and responsibilities are like your line markings, get in the right lane. Is this a trustee decision? Is this an elder's decision? Where are those lanes? Signage is policy and procedure. Tells us how to drive on the road.
Tells how to drive on the road.
The expectations. It keeps us safe. And then I was thinking about the speed limit and the pace that churches and organizations run at. That if you go too fast, and your governance isn't in place, and these things aren't in place.
Oh, we've talked about that today, haven't we? What happens if you go too quickly? And
if you go quickly, and then the same problem if you go too slow as well. And then I was thinking about the maintenance. You can have a brand new motorway.
Yeah.
In 3 years' time, like maintenance is actually going to be an issue. You're going to have potholes. You're going to have lines that are faded, signs that are broken, or discolored, and all those things, and you begin to it gets a little bit unsafe then to drive on that road.
And then you get the services, which is the church offices good
good
management
I hadn't even
course.
thought about the services. Yes.
Well, let's pull in to do the service and do a course, and then we're back on our way.
I love that and and all these things, we can see them, and a lot of leaders do. They see them as restrictions. Stopping my speed limit. You slow me down. I've got to close down the lane to do some work on the governing document. Yes.
Yeah.
What does that mean? That means we're going to have a bit of a backlog. We're going to move slower as a church. But actually, if we can get all those things in place, the whole reason they're there on a motorway is to get you free flowing to where you want to go. So they're not restrictions. They're actually there built in to help you. And I'm
good.
I just love this illustration. I'm just like,
great. To avoid the put, it's got miles on it. It's got some miles. You can keep going with this.
Yeah. And then I was thinking about like driver training, licensing. And I was thinking, what could the floodlights be? I mean, my wife was going, Gav, you really are taking this a little bit too far. As I'm lying in bed, like making notes, I hadn't even thought about the services.
Yeah, services. Yeah. Pit stop.
And then I was thinking, mate, actually, there's some tricky bits of road where you've got to do a bridge.
Yeah. And you've got to navigate it carefully.
You need some specialists people in,
Yeah, you do.
And sometimes you've got to take a diversion, and actually the diversion keeps you flowing. And I was like, okay, so this is my new governance
I think
illustration.
you like an analogy just as much as me. It's a great governance illustration. It's fantastic. I'm a very big fan. There'd be one other thing I'll drop in because just to highlight to people is there's been big changes at the Charity Commission in terms of finances. So for those whom it's relevant, there is a new, as in from January, new finance charity SORP, which is the guidance to how some churches would have to do their finances. But the really big news, which I think will affect the vast majority of churches, is that there have been key threshold changes which come into play from October. So if you aren't aware of them, check them out. There'll be lots more content from ourselves and other places coming out soon, but check them out because actually there might be some really helpful things to be aware of. So.
That's really helpful. And I think it's a really good point, because there was a church that I worked with recently who they were doing a big building project, did a big special offering, had a whole load of funds in, and were totally unaware that they'd gone over the different threshold.
They'd gone over the threshold.
And with the kind of momentum of what they were trying to do to raise the funds, they'd forgotten about it, and now going, okay, how do we unwind this and make this work? So really good point, mate. And check out those new kind of regulations.
Biggest change. They haven't changed those thresholds for years, and I mean years. It's a long time, so it's a big change. So check them out. Make sure you're aware. So
mate, we could keep going because I just love you. You're just so fun to talk to. My wicked accountant. Tim Wyatt, and mate, you've got capacity to take on a few more churches, particularly those who are using Expense Plus. Give me a push on your services here. Come on.
So we love working with churches. We absolutely do, and part of that is the kind of the missional heart that we have, that was set up by my grandfather many moons ago. So we don't have loads of more capacity. We have a little bit more, but we're always on a journey. With that, I mean, while we're here, I mean, if you are someone who loves finance and has a skill set in this area and is looking for something in independent examinations and knows churches well, we'd be very interested to hear from you, because we as to go back to the analogy, we're on the motorway with the churches, probably kind of like we're not an RAC or anything like that, but we're on the journey with them, and we want to carry on doing what we're doing and not hit a limit, but we know at some point we will. So we specialize in doing independent examinations, but lots of other bits and pieces, and particularly to do with governance as well. So that's what we do. But it's been an exciting journey. There's lots going on. Lots going on, and particularly what excites me as well is when a church gets in touch with me to say we're doing. Our cafe is going too well. we're hitting headaches, VAT headaches, trading headaches, and things like that. So if you're hitting problems with that, we can signpost you well. So there's things like that. But yes, but really, we like going on the journey. Is what we like. So,
mate, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Bus. Absolute, top man indeed. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to this. There's a couple of things you could take away. Have a look at the cash flow. Look at that. If this is a way that you could particularly serve your leaders, if you're a trustee of a charity, you really do want to be seeing a cash flow. That is going to really serve you and to help you with those kind of early warning sign, which I think is a really good, really, really helpful thing. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to run past Tim and I, then please reach out to info@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you and link you up to either one of us. If you're interested in a good church management course, then please check out the website and have a look at that and see if that's something that you might be interested in doing for yourself or with your team, or a resource for your church. We'd love it to be used in that way. We'll see you next time on the podcast. Thanks for listening. See you, Tim. Cheers, mate.
Thank you so much.